Welcome to In Confidence, where what we share in confidence helps us grow in confidence. Today's episode is about the frustration and the resistance people are feeling about going back to the office. The return to office mandates have started to roll in all through this year, and for a lot of folks, April 1 marks the transition to 4, maybe 5 days a week, full-time back in the office. On today's episode, we're going to deep dive into this return to office. First, we're going to cover why are people resisting going back? What are the underlying dynamics for this return to office? Where's it coming from? And why are people upset about it? The second is, what can we do about it? How do we turn this moment into a win-win situation? And third, because we are still a fashion brand, we're going to talk about how to dress for the moment. First, why are people resisting going back to the office? Well, for the first time, we have 4 generations in the same workplace. We have baby boomers born 1946 to 1964, Generation X, 1965 to 1980, millennials who are born 1981 to 2000, and Gen Z, 2001 to 2020. And that's the workplace, that's the group of people who entered the workplace during the pandemic. So for the first time, we have 4 generations in the office. And I call this a 2-on-2 battle, because if you think about boomers as well as Gen Xers, they did not grow up digitally native. In fact, I'm on the cusp. I was born in 1979, so I always say I'm between Gen X and millennial. And what's interesting is when I joined the workforce in 2000, there were no really digital products. I used a Palm Pilot. I would dial in and check my voicemail. Everything was done in person, or if we did have a conference call, which did happen, people would be in conference rooms together while they were taking the call. I still remember the days of having to sync my Palm Pilot. It was revolutionary to get a BlackBerry. And I did not spend my childhood growing up with a smartphone. In fact, I didn't get my first phone until I joined a consulting firm, and I had an old Motorola StarTAC that then evolved into a Nokia flip phone. But I just personally did not grow up digitally native. In fact, all connections were really done in person. When I was in college, I remember we used to leave each other messages on answering machines. You couldn't say, oh, I'm running 15 minutes late. You have to show up on time wherever you were headed. And then we have the next 2 generations, Gen Zers, as well as millennials, who grew up with digitally native things. They were connected through digital formats. If I think about text messaging, relationships and friendships that were established virtually, you could have a virtual pen pal, computers, apps, and on top of it, these 2 generations really focus on purpose greater than their career. So having deep values and meaning beyond just going to work. And so we have this clash happening because for the first 2 generations, which I'm a part of, I'm definitely grew up in a Gen Xer type culture. All of our connections, our mentorship moments happened in person, or we would just pick up the phone. We didn't send emails or text messages to exchange ideas or to make decisions. In fact, many people will say, oh, it's so weird that you picked up the phone and called me, Lisa, because I'm just so used to text and email being the format. I still pick up the phone and say, hey, do you have 5 minutes? We could just get this done in 5 minutes if we could just hash it out. And so that culture of mentorship and connection that is forged by in-person relationships is in direct contrast to the 2 generations who are so comfortable in digital formats. I'll send you a text, I'll follow up on email, or we could just do this on Zoom and have that conversation. So that is why I think we're feeling this resistance. The folks who are in positions of power are really mostly part of the first 2 generations. On top of it, there is a huge push for extroversion, charisma, interpersonal exchange that I think defines those 2 generations. And so not surprisingly, we feel resistance and frustration for a lot of these return to office mandates. I'm going to layer on top of this that if you are a Gen Zer who entered the workplace in 2020 to up until recently, all of the interactions were done via Zoom. You might have been hired over a Microsoft Teams meeting, or you might have received your offer via email and via a virtual format. And so there's actually also a moment where you may never have experienced in-office culture, or if you did, it was sporadic at best. So that's the underlying current we're walking into, which is for the first time, the workplace has 4 different generations, each generation raised in a different way with opportunities that look different and a workplace culture that is unique to each generation. So what do we do about this? Well, what I did before we go into what we should do about it is I decided to do my own balance sheet around the benefits and drawbacks of working from home. And here's what I came up with, because I don't think we can solve something or talk about a win-win solution until we understand why people love working from home. So here's my positives of working from home. The first, which I think is the most talked about, is flexibility is really beneficial to life stage moments. What do I mean by that? If you are a working mom, remote work doesn't magically erase the responsibilities about being a working mother, where you're in charge of the home as well as your workplace, but it does make them more manageable. First of all, remote work eliminates commute times. It allows you to throw your hat in the ring for opportunities that might not be in your own city. It also saves money in terms of childcare costs and gives moms the flexibility to balance work and home life in a way that isn't crushingly unsustainable. So when I think about working mothers, remote work allows them to say, okay, when is the deliverable due? Great, I can still go pick up my kids, drop them off, get the work done late at night after they've gone to bed, or fit it in during a time when they're at school or they have after school activities. I also think that extends to people who have, for example, aging parents or someone that they're sick that they're caring for, that it allows them to get them to doctor's appointments on time, or perhaps arrange the right schedule that works for someone who they're helping through a health issue. And there's no one who can tell us that flexibility doesn't help us in terms of meeting our life commitments outside of work. The other thing that work from home does is it boosts productivity. I think the distractions of the everyday hustle and bustle of a workplace means that sometimes I need to type up the notes for this meeting. I just need an hour to myself with no one coming into my office or talking loudly in the hallway, or if you're in a big communal space, you have to put your headphones on to get something done. The other thing that I think it does from a profiles of leadership standpoint is it allows people who are not naturally extroverted to be fairly evaluated on their work. The New York Times did a great piece that said introverts thrived during the pandemic because they could be fairly evaluated on their work and not defined by the water cooler talk of belonging. They could actually submit their work and be fairly seen. Or if they didn't feel comfortable having their camera on in a virtual meeting, they could type their response in the chat, take themselves off mute. They didn't feel stage fright or feel the need to perform in front of an audience. And lastly, I would say we've actually been able to benefit in other ways, like reduced carbon footprint because we're not commuting, or even embracing AI, artificial intelligence for note-taking. I think we've realized that there are some tasks that were done in person that we can now use AI to make it more efficient. One of the things I love is when people use Otter AI or any of those tools on a Zoom meeting, and all of a sudden after you've shut down the meeting, you get an email that summarizes the entire meeting, notes that are better than you probably would have taken. You might have missed a point because you weren't listening as intensely in person. And now I have a super detailed record of what happened in that virtual meeting. So I think there's been so many benefits to working from home. There have been some drawbacks, which have been the primary push for why there are these return to office mandates. One is it does require connection and mentorship that typically happens in person and is supernatural and is really human to connect with others. It's harder to do that when you're working from home because someone can't just knock on your office door and say, hey, I'm gonna grab a cup of coffee. Do you wanna come with me? And you chat about any aspect of storytelling or personal things that are happening or things that you're struggling with at work. that has to be scheduled, or you have to text someone, or it's being done in a more impersonal format. I do think that one of the drawbacks is what I call inspiration and spontaneity and problem solving. There have been so many times where I've got this great idea, and I will be very open that you could label me as the most extroverted of extroverts. So I do understand that this is my process, but I just need another person to bounce the idea off of, talk about it. And if I have to text them or call them or get on a Zoom, it's not as fun as just walking down the hallway and saying, hey, could we talk about this? Let's hash this out. And I think that is why sometimes when you are in person, there's quicker decision making. I think work from home, one of the drawbacks is it might take 12 emails back and forth, and you might not even understand the person's intent. In fact, you're like, oh my gosh, I think this person's mad at me, when in fact, they're just typing off a quick response. They're just firing it off. And if we were in person, I could hear the tone of your voice, your body language. I could read what you were thinking, and we might be able to make that decision more quickly. So that's my balance sheet of the positives and the drawbacks of working from home. And I wanted to lay that out because I think it forms the foundation of a blueprint of what we can do. How do we turn the page and turn this moment into a win-win? Right now. I'm just going to talk about right now, and then I'm going to close out later with my long-term thoughts about what we do. But right now, what do we do about this return to office mandate? I grouped my thoughts into two categories. For those of us in positions of power who want this return to office, what do we do? And for those of us who are resistant to going back to the office, what do we do? You can go to our website, gravitasnewyork.com, and download the PDF for this episode where I have sort of a checklist for both groups. And I hope it's a nice guide or a reminder for some of the ideas that we've collected. All right, let's talk about for those of us who are in leadership positions, and that includes, I include myself in this. We first have to acknowledge that it won't be the same as what we remember in 2019. I just want to say the workplace has shifted. The last 5 years have taught us a lot. And so let's first acknowledge that it won't be the same. And the more we try to make it the same, it's not going to happen. Given that, I've got 5 ideas for what leaders can do to make this transition better, seamless, and to get the best of both worlds. The first is we actually have to take a moment and recognize that there are very different profiles and styles of leadership, that we're not one size fits all. And we have to nurture space for other profiles of leadership to succeed. So, as I said earlier, introverts loved working from home. What did they love about it? And we can't just make the return to office an extrovert's paradise. And I think one way to do this is to have everyone take a leadership assessment. It could be Myers-Briggs, it could be Clifton Strengths, it could be our quiz, myconfidencelanguage.com, and say, hey, as part of this return to office, I want us all to get to know each other again. And what you might find as folks are sharing the results is, oh, okay, that person has a more introverted or quieter leadership style. I'm going to create space for them throughout the day where they can go and re-energize themselves and think about the problem, or create more moments where, okay, these folks love to problem solve in person together. So these are the folks that I want to pull into a problem solving session. But I think we have to start off by saying, you know, if introverts were happy during the pandemic because they didn't have to do that water cooler talk of belonging, well, now I have to recognize that it can't just be return to office and we're going back to normal around everyone talking over each other and having all these in-person moments. I've got to create space and honor the different ways in which people want to contribute, learn, lead, communicate. The second is trust. We have to trust people. For 5 years, there were huge blocks of time where you didn't know what someone was doing. They might have been picking up their dry cleaning. They might have been going for that 10-minute walk. They might have been getting the notes done from the meeting that they just logged off of. And create flexibility where appropriate, because we are asking people to realign their mindset and their lifestyle. One thing that I will say is on our team, we have a trust level where Claire, for example, on my team, there was a day 2 weeks ago where she had to get a lot of what I would say tedious tasks done. She just had to get them off her plate. And she sent me a message and she said, hey, if you don't need me today in the office, I looked at the calendar, there's nothing we need to do in person. Could I just sit at my kitchen table and just crank through that list? I'll call you 3 times just to touch base throughout the day. And I said, you know what? I think she is going to be more productive there. So absolutely work from home. Or, hey, I have this personal thing for my kid and I would love to have the flexibility to get things done in person in the morning, but then make it to that specific event in the afternoon. We gave so many people trust for the last 5 years that I think we need to honor that commitment we made to them. Now, it's not as easily done if your company has you badge in, like you have to prove that you've been in the office 4 days a week. And so what I would say is we need to trust people when they say, hey, all of my meetings are the first half of the day. For the second half of the day, I need to do all the follow-ups. And I think it'd be much more productive if I could go run this errand and finish up the rest of the day from home. And I really like this idea of we've trusted people, so let's keep trusting people. The third thing I was thinking of is productivity hacks. And there's all of this data that suggests that the return to office will actually make us less productive because of distractions, because of in-person engagement. And what I was thinking is, how do we make the best use of what was great about virtual meetings? So I love that we didn't waste time, that you knew you had a 30-minute block for this Teams meeting. Get it done. Do more with less. How do we mimic the effectiveness of virtual meetings? And how do we use AI tools? So one of the AI tools I love is voice to text. So can we use recordings, for example, of every meeting so that it can go voice to text and then AI allows us to write up the notes more quickly? How inefficient are handwritten notes? And I think that would actually boost productivity in person. The fourth is we have to walk the talk. One of the things that I thought was interesting is WPP, which 100,000 employees on April 1st, which is today, are going back 4 days a week. And I want to read you what the internal memo said. I believe that we do our best work when we are together in person. It's easier to learn from each other. It's a better way to mentor colleagues starting out in the industry, and it helps us win pitches as a truly integrated team. For me, that is a contract to walk the talk. And so if we believe that in-person will make us better mentors, we have to deliver on the coaching and mentoring promise we've made. So here are some examples. If you are a leader, then part of this can say, hey, as part of this transition to return to office, I've blocked off 2 times per week. I'm calling them office hours. It's an hour twice a week. Anyone can book 15 minutes with me. Send me a meeting invite, coordinate with my assistant, and I would love to have a coffee with you. Let's turn that one-on-one that we would have done virtually into an in-person moment. Or, hey, once a month, I would love an idea from the team around how we could get together. Would it be lunch that we should all eat together and have some shared activity? I'm happy to organize and fund that. But we have to deliver on this mentoring promise, because if we're just going back to the office so that the meetings that could have happened on Zoom are now happening in person to make us feel better or so we have an audience, that's not enough. We now have to go above and beyond and say, how do I structurally create these mentoring moments? Because there are a lot of people who are out of practice or who have never been in an office. So they might be really afraid to book 15 minutes on your calendar. But when you say, hey, twice a week, it's office hours, I've got 1 hour and 1 hour blocked, anyone on my team deserves 15 minutes of my time in person. And the last thing I was thinking about is, how do we honor the work from home mindset? Because people have real lives. And for some people, their career doesn't fully define them. How do we allow them to have wellness breaks, take walks, share their passions outside of work? And I think that work from home mindset we can carry into the office when we say, you know what, go to that yoga class. Please leave the office an hour early so that you get that in. Or you need 20 minutes a day to meditate? Great, let's find you a space in the office where we can have a meditation room. But I think when we take that work from home mindset and what's the best of it, the benefits of it, and we try to bring that into the office setting, we can get the most out of this opportunity. The second group of thoughts I have is for those of us who are resistant to going back to the office, I think there are two branches on the issue tree. I'm going to explore both branches. First, if you love what you do, but don't love office culture or going back to the office, then it's about creating a work dynamic that builds in the best of work from home. I'm calling it an and, not an or story. When you can see this not as a zero-sum game where I've won or I've lost the battle on return to office, and you can think of it as a win-win scenario, you're going to get the most out of this opportunity. So 3 ideas. One is shift your mindset to what you're going to get out of it. So personally, write down all the things that you're going to benefit from going back to the office. Here's an example. My boyfriend realized that he hadn't met most of his bosses that have hired him in person. He didn't know how tall they were, in fact. And he said, you know what? I'm excited because these are the people who bet on me, and I'm excited to have a coffee with them. I want to meet them. Or seek out a connection that could be beneficial to you. Maybe there's someone you've looked up to in your company that now you have a chance to book time on their calendar, bump into them in the hallway, and you could even say, I loved that article that was written about you, or there was something you said in that virtual town hall that really made a difference for me. You can also have what I call an active mentoring plan. The 2 or 3 people that you've admired that you haven't spent time with in person, and you can actively seek them out. I did that a lot when I was a consultant. In fact, that's how I got on some of my favorite teams. Was there were a few people that I admired in my practice, and I said, I really want to get to know you and be on one of your teams someday. The second is advocate for the positives of your working style. If you have a quieter working style and you know that you need time and space throughout the day to rejuvenate yourself or to think about a hard problem, block it on your calendar. I'm kind of I would say an extrovert who has some introverted tendencies. I actually block off on my calendar what I call thinking time. And that thinking time might be for me just to crush a hard problem or to think about something that has been nagging me or to even just go through my inbox. But make sure everyone knows that that's your working style. And that's what I mean by advocating for it is, hey, throughout the day, I'm going to need 1 hour just to do all the follow-ups, and it needs to be uninterrupted with no distractions. Maybe even make a fun sign out of it. The third is leave room for the magic. And I think this goes back to mindset, because I think what we're going to find is laughter, shared storytelling, passionate curiosity. And that's tough to do when you're on the clock on a virtual meeting or you're texting or you have a Teams chat going. And so leave room for that magic. If you want, you can refer to episode 1 of the podcast where we talk about passionately curious questions, and maybe that's a good guide for you. Maybe you're in a second group of people where you realize you don't love your job and you don't love the workplace. And I think this is a moment that might be telling you something very deep about yourself, because maybe the return to the office, if you can't overcome your aversion to it, maybe there's a deeper issue. One of my favorite quotes from Jensen Huang, the CEO of NVIDIA, I'm going to read it to you because it really spoke to me. And special shout out to Mike Dominguez at Alhi, the CEO of Alhi, who sent me this. So thank you, Mike, for sending this to me. Jensen Huang said, there's a phrase that says you should choose your career based on your passion. And usually people connect passion with happiness. Nothing there is wrong, but there's something missing. And the reason for that is because when you want to build something great, it's not easy to do. And when you're doing something that's not easy to do, you're not always enjoying it. I don't love every day of my job, and every day I'm not happy, but I love the company every single second. And so I think what people misunderstand is they think the best jobs are the ones that bring you happiness all the time. I don't think that's right. You have to suffer. You have to struggle. You have to endeavor. You have to do those hard things and work through it in order to really appreciate what you've done. There's no such thing that is great that was easy to do. I love that message. This return to office is hard. We're going to struggle, and it's going to be a tough transition for a lot of people. And so if you still love what you do, then it's worth it. But if you don't, maybe this is the opportunity to reevaluate whether or not you're in the workplace that's right for you. Maybe this is a chance for you to shift your perspective and bet on yourself and choose a career that you will love and won't mind going back to the office for. Or maybe it's remote work that you've always wanted to do. The last thing I want to talk about is how do we dress for this moment, because we are still a fashion company, and how to get back out there with confidence through your fashion. First of all, I have to acknowledge that we're not going to dress like 2019. We're not wearing dresses with heels and jackets, and that's sad for me, but also awesome. And now we have to acknowledge that dressing for work is a blend of style and comfort, and we have to change the role that apparel plays in our lives. I don't think we've ever had a moment where the lines have been more blurred in our closet, that work clothes are really casual clothes and casual clothes can be work clothes. And what I think is what we have to do is think about what's appropriate, what's going to give me a confidence boost, but blend your portfolio. So for the most part, we can acknowledge that trends have shifted. So for example, I'm wearing sneakers. If you're on our YouTube channel, you can see our sneakers. I'm wearing a button-down blouse. My pants do have elastic waistband, but they're still appropriate, but I'm wearing sneakers. I would have never done that in 2019, FYI. And so it's about, I feel confident that I have a piece on, a button-down blouse that makes me feel good about myself. It's an MVP in my closet. It's a conversation starter. People always ask me what's on our blouse. Shout out to Erin Gallagher from Hype Women, because it's all the quotes that we collected of women that she admires. And that's the conversation piece. That's the piece that gives me that boost. But I can be comfortable in elastic waisted pants and sneakers. In fact, someone on LinkedIn wrote me a message and said, "Can you please convince my boss that I can wear sneakers with my suit? He's so old school." And I said to her, that might be a tough hurdle for you because he is old school. It's that boomer and Gen Xer generation we talked about earlier in the episode. But what I think you can do is get a groundswell of support. Maybe there's 10 to 15 other people who want to wear super nice fancy sneakers with their suits. And maybe you can make a case for it. If he still says no, then unfortunately you might have to wait until you're in power and he's retired. But I think for those of us who are leaders, we have to change our own aspirations for what we think work clothes look like. We're not going to be wearing three-piece suits like we used to. And blend what makes us feel good about ourselves with comfort. And I think that's really the bridge. And if you're on the website, we're going to put some example outfits on this episode landing page of things that really are work appropriate, but still comfortable. I'm going to close out with what I think is a longer term call to action. All of the tips that we've talked about are really for right now, just to get us through this moment. But I think we do have to start planning for the next 10 or 20 years. And to be open with you, the millennials and Gen Zers will be running the place, so it will look very different. And I want to advocate for flexibility and remote work because I think it allows us to get the best talent out there, and it allows folks like working moms or people taking care of aging parents or sick loved ones to be successful in the workplace. What I find is the best talent may not even be in your own city and may not be able to come into the office every day. We work with freelancers all the time on our team. I think the burden on all of us as leaders is to think through different categories of work and start to think about which ones can be remote, which ones are definitely in person, or if we can move to a remote mindset, how do we create in-person moments that get maximum impact, whether it's connection or decision-making? And I think this is a new leadership style that is built on trust and takes advantage of this moment in history. Thanks so much for joining us for this episode of In Confidence. I hope you're leaving this space stronger than the way you came in. If you love this episode, please share it with someone who needs to hear it today and subscribe so that you never miss a moment of inspiration. In the words of my 9-year-old self, I see you, I value you, and I believe in you. This is In Confidence.